So you're still with us here at the UPSA East Wing, where we're still bringing you the special edition of Newsfile. We're just wrapping up now with our last but one conversation. This is the main one before we wrap up with the media conversation. This has to do with the politics, the elections, the vigilantism, all the key issues that we'll be talking about in quite some detail in a few days as we enter the 2020 election year. This year has been a major year when it comes to elections reforms. Particularly, we have a law for the very first time that attempts to regulate and deal with politically related violence, as it has to do specifically with vigilantism. And has this law worked since it was enacted, signed into law in July this year? And what are the political parties doing themselves to help make this law effective as we approach 2020? My guest in the studio with us here at UPSA on this in this auditorium is the General Secretary of the New Patriotic Party, the governing party, Mr. John Bodu. Grateful that you could join us. Also joining me is Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, who, of course, is the Executive Director of the Center for Democratic Development. And Kofi Abuchi is the past Dean of GIMPA, is also a private legal practitioner, a partner at Access Legal Solicitors. We were built to have some of Usuan Pofo join us as National Chairman of the National Democratic Congress. Just been told in my ear that he has an emergency, and so he's been replaced by Mr. Osei Kwame Griffiths. He's the Director of IT for the National Democratic Congress. Mr. Griffith, thank you for your time also in the conversation. But I want to start with Mr. John Bodu on his own assessment of how this year had been for the NPP. I know he started the year with the tragedy, I guess, of the Ayawaso West Wuogon by-elections. We were all subjects to the Ayawaso West Wuogon Commission of Inquiry, of which Mr. Kofi Abuchi was the Executive Secretary. You appeared before the commission yourself. I also did. What's your own assessment of that period? It was a very difficult period for politics in this country.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that we've done very well as a nation. Gone were the days where people think that multi-party democracy necessarily breeds conflicts and rancor. And as a result, it's the reason for most takeovers of our democratic culture. If you recall, from 1992 to date, apart from few instances, particularly on by-elections, where most actors congregate, national to the lowest level. And as a result of primarily our inability to protect ourselves, and the fact that there are few sanctions to people who exact or want to take the law into their own hands over the period, you realize that it serves as incentive for people to misbehave over the period of time. So I'm particularly happy about the fact that when it happened this time around, it has happened before. We've had Chirepone by-elections. You saw security operative shooting in the midst of crowd. Had it not been the presence of Professor Bob Watson in Chirepone, we'll have been telling different stories as we speak now. It happened in Otchere. It has happened over the period. So for a president to take action, apart from denouncing it, apart from even the political party itself, the New Patriotic Party condemning it, we went the extra mile in setting up this commission made up of prominent people in this country, including yourself and Prof, to go into it. They did their work. They presented their reports. Even along the line, the president even went further, knowing very well that we already have laws that also look into it in terms of people doing what they don't have to do, for instance. But President thinks that if you consolidate all into an act, reading together with the other related offenses, for instance, it will help. But beyond that, he also recognized that the main political parties, NDC, MPP, irrespective of the availability of the law, need also to do more. So President called on the political parties to start talking to each other. We did so under the auspices of National Peace Council. We've met, and the final meeting, unfortunately, just as the national chairman was supposed to be here and he's not here, it's the same thing. We were to meet a week before they, at their instance, they asked for the meeting to reschedule to another date, even in the morning that they were supposed to be there. They decided not to be there at all. But we took far-reaching decisions, because before then we had together taken certain decisions in the direction of making sure that, one, we should publicize the Vigilantism Act to let people understand what it means and the consequences of going against the law. We should also, as political parties, not provide a buffer or a shield for our members who engage themselves or get themselves in such acts. We should also be able, on our level, set some code of conduct, just as we do most often. And during elections, you realize that there will be the industry of peace industry rises, you know, at that time. We should be able to have a functional code of conduct and a standing committee, so to speak, by the political parties, right from national to the polling station, identifying or getting early signals of possibility of such groupings existing, and finding ways of resolving it, and also strengthening and helping the security agencies to so to speak, solve some of these problems. So these are some of the activities that, as political parties, I'm happy that the NDC joined us in the first meeting to agree that we are not going to harbor, we are not going to hide, we are going to denounce people in our political party or in political party related violence, and make sure that we don't provide a buffer or a shield for them. And I think that it's well.
Three key things happened this year relating to that. So there was the Peace Council-led talks, which was supposed to draw out a roadmap. That roadmap is still in limbo. We understand there's disagreement over its wording and what it should say. Then there's the law, which has been passed. Its implementation is a different question we'll look at shortly. And then there is obviously the Ayawaso West Wuogon by-election report and the white paper. And that's where I want to focus this a bit more, because since the white paper was issued, I'm curious to know what level of implementation has happened, if at all. I mean, remember your take on that. I mean, it was such a big deal having the commission for the first time to look into election-related violence. It went on for a long time. Kofi and his eminent, commissioners came together, put together a good report, got to the executive, put a white paper together that rejected a lot of the things and a lot of controversy. But even those that were accepted, it's what, several months in, the year is almost ending. I haven't had any concrete step taken to implement some of the very far-reaching recommendations. What's your own assessment of that going into an election year?
Well, I think the idea of the commission when it was established was very welcome. The composition instilled a lot of confidence in people, and we all were very happy that the president had taken the step to establish an independent panel to investigate the Ayawaso West Wuogon issue and make recommendations. I think the aftermath of the commission's work, and of course the commission sat publicly, many appeared before it, CDD made representations before the commission. I think the aftermath was a bit anticlimactic and somewhat disappointing. We had expected that the government would take on board many more of the recommendations than it took. And especially, I think, because, as John has also mentioned, I mean, this culture of impunity had built up over many years. We also thought that it was an opportunity, to use the implementation of some of the Commission's report to signal basically zero tolerance of this kind of behavior. And the Commission did make certain recommendations along those lines, where certain identified persons were fingered as having been behind that. And there was some expectation that the appropriate legal processes would then commence for those persons to be brought to book. The fact that that has not happened and that did not happen is somewhat disappointing, especially in light of the law, right? So here is a law that criminalizes, I mean, that behavior is already criminal, I mean, basically, but enhances the sentencing for participating in that kind of an activity. Not vigilantism in the ordinary sense of the word, but using violence to attain those political ends. So we thought that if that's where we're going, if we're trying a new legal solution to this problem, then the Commission's report offered us an opportunity to actually show good faith, exhibit some good faith and say that, look, this is the kind of behavior that this law is trying to deal with, and it was already criminal behavior when you did it anyway. So the Commission recommends we prosecute you, so we'll go ahead to do it. I think that the fact that there is that law that tries to put criminal penalty to these things, and yet a portion of the Commission's report that would have given us an opportunity to signal that commitment, that we threw out that bit and then went ahead with the law, seems to give mixed signals. And we were not happy to see that. But I think at the root also, not that the law is not useful, but the fundamental problems driving this are largely political, right? There are political drivers of this tendency towards violence in our elections. Those guys who partake in this activity don't just get up to do it. There are particular motivations, there are particular things that are set in motion, there's an environment that is created that enables that to happen. So I think trying again, going back to my point about the toolkit, the law is good, it's fine, right? Fine legal tool is one of the solutions possibly, but what about the other more fundamental drivers of the problem? Otherwise, it would look like you are putting Band-Aid on a cancerous sore, right? I mean, the problem is not the open sore, right? There's a fundamental problem that is within the body. And if you put Band-Aid on it, it might just, make it look good, but it doesn't really solve the problem. So I think, again, there's some mixed signals about it. And we're also disappointed that, once again, an attempt at dialogue between the parties, well-intentioned, has also faltered, And this inability of our two parties to find common cause on some of these very grave national issues is also disturbing. I mean, each time we enter an election year with a lot of trepidation about, anxiety about possible violence, we almost always avert it, fortunately, but we almost always get to the precipice before we step back. And, one of these days, we may not be lucky. So I think, when you look at the problem of vigilantism, it's of course only a physical it's a physical manifestation of an underlying tone in our politics that is quite incendiary. The tone of our politics is not very civil. It is very muscular. It is very bellicose. And so it is not surprising that from that kind of tone and language, we see a translation sometimes into the physical. All of these are factors that enable it. And I think that we must just basically just compress this, just be a bit more civil in the kind of conversation we have. civil in the way in which we disagree, like when we come here, you know, looking at the banter between Ablakwa and Duchum. I mean, that is the kind of politics we must have. The kind of conversation between John Jinapor and Gabi. Yes, parties must disagree. I mean, they disagree fundamentally about issues. Fine. But there has to be a civil way of having that conversation. You know, and when we let the tone of the politics get too incendiary, then we also signal to our supporters that it is probably okay to go the next step. And of course, because of impunity, these things have happened over and over again. So I think, on the whole, as we enter elections, we are hoping that the other activities that were supposed to support the law, that the dialogue will resume, some agreement will come early in the quarter, first quarter, about what to do about these various vigilante groups. The law is still not, it's still not sufficient. There are still problems with, you know, there are people who have doubts about even the efficacy of the law to achieve that kind of objectives. What's a vigilante? They just drop the name and morph into something else. They say, well, I'm not a vigilante, I'm not, you know. So there are all kinds of question marks about the law. But I think political consensus between the two parties to basically just tame the language, tame the muscular tone, tame the incendiary tone of our politics is something that we need to do.
You raised a very important. I see you did some research recently that talked about how these groups have now gone into communities. And when you speak to the parties now, they say they are no longer vigilante groups. They are community-based. You know, they help build boreholes, etc., etc. Let me bring in Griffiths. Mr. Griffiths, are you satisfied where we are on the dawn of another election year, that in the wake of Ayawaso, we have rectified the problems that led us where we were, that in 2020, we are ready to have an election free of violence?
No, not at all. I would start by saying, defining the problem. The issue of violence in politics and political vigilantism that has engaged the media and the country at the moment has come about as a result of the occurrences of Ayawaso West Wuogon. So we believe as a political party that any solution that is prescribed, whether through law or by the dialogue between the MPP and the NDC, you know, through the auspices of the National Peace Council, should be able to prevent the occurrence of Ayawaso West Wuogon. If it fails to do that, then it is not adequate, you know, going into 2020 elections. To begin with, the problem and the occurrence of Ayawaso West Wuogon is the recruitment of political vigilantes into the national security apparatus and the deployment of same to intimidate, to maim, and to harass political opponents during an election, a by-election. And as I speak to you now, people have been very badly affected by it. Some cannot walk, and families have been torn apart as a result of that. This is what necessitated the commission, which we commend the president for putting together. However, we also want to note that over 2/3 of the recommendations of the commission have been rejected through a white paper by this government. The likes of Double and ASP Azugu are still free people walking about. The white paper stated, regrettably, that the violence meted on a sitting member of parliament more or less was warranted because it was provoked, as if provocation is an excuse for committing crime in this country. So we believe that when the president also came out to say that we should engage as two political parties, MPP, NDC, the NDC thought that it was not adequate for just the chairman of the MPP to write to the chairman of the and we have a venue and sit and talk about political vigilantism, but it was necessary to have it regulated, to have it more or less put under somebody that could more or less mediate.
Which is what you eventually had.
Yes, which we eventually had.
Just as looking forward, if you look into the, what will be your proposals to fix the problem? Since you say the problem hasn't been fixed.
Yes.
What will be your proposal? I mean, I think the problems with the process leading, I think, is being articulated. What will be your proposal to fixing the problem, to avoiding the violence that we all expect might happen in 2020?
Well, first of all, the vigilantes that have been recruited into the national security apparatus, as recommended by the Emil Short Commission, should be disbanded. But what are we seeing? We rather see further training of such people like Otchere and other military installations. And let me say this, as somebody who has actually, been involved in some way with, have some military experience, that there's a reason why the soldier's life is so regimented. There's a reason why you go through basic training, and some of the most painful times in my life is my basic training, and then afterwards, some engagements that happen within the military. Before you put a weapon in the hands of anybody, that person must have the discipline to know when to engage, because there are rules of engagement. You must have the discipline to know when to engage and when not to. There are international conventions that governs how deadly forces must be used. One that comes to mind is the deadly force triangle. That tells you that if somebody has the opportunity, the capability, and the intent to engage, use deadly force, you have the right to in self-defense. So if we decide that, okay, you have recruited your vigilantes because you have passed a law that says nobody can, and the NDC, we are a very peaceful party. We don't owe any of these vigilantes good. Let me make that point very clear. I know the CDD has come out with a report that has named some groups, but they are around certain individuals within the party, and we have stated clearly that no, the party is not, has not formed any of these groups. We do not support any of these groups, and we have demonstrated that through our primaries from the branch level, where we have discouraged the use of these groups, right from branch level to constituency to national and the parliamentary primaries that are almost concluding. Where there have been a few incidents, we have left the police, who we believe have the mandate to ensure law and order in this country, to deal with the situation, So unlike a situation where you have people harass and beat up a certain officer, a police officer at the Jubilee House, and instead of focusing on that issue, we are rather looking at punishing the person who may have leaked some tape that gave the evidence that such a thing had occurred. And where you have a whole regional security coordinator driven out of office, and the videos are all over the place. So
these are issues that, so your first solution is that take the people that you've recruited out of the service?
Yes.
Okay, and then what will be the other proposal?
Well, once you do that, then enforcement of laws. The issue of vigilantism has to do not necessarily the lack of laws in this country. It has had to do with the enforcement of the laws and the cover that these people get under the political parties. So first of all, their laws must be enforced. Whether it existed before, it has just been created. It has to be enforced.
Regardless of which party.
Regardless of who.
Okay. I want to come to Kofi Abuchi. Mr. Abuchi, so I left you for last because now you're no longer the secretary. The white paper had gone out on your report. We are really at the time when we're going into an election. Yeah? I just wonder, based on all that you've heard and you really are the heart of the work, whether you're confident that the work you did is adequate to help fix the problem going into an election year on the back of the white paper.
Well, I think we have to separate them. It's hard to put them together.
Okay, I know.
Because the white paper is an opinion. It's the constitutional statement on the report, But in the process, it's an opinion of the issuer. So the white paper, as has been issued, is the opinion of government in respect of the findings of the commission. It's also important to understand, and I've listened to a lot of discussion. I have refused interviews on this out of courtesy for a variety of reasons, and you are a chief culprit in that.
Yes.
You know, constantly trying to get me to say something on this. But I've refused out of courtesy. But just to clarify, the government can state its opinion on the report. The government can reject the report. Again, that represents its opinion. But the rejection does not destroy the report. So there are two separate things. The findings of the Commission of Inquiry under Article 280 constitutes its equivalent to a High Court order or a High Court judgment. The same way you can't destroy a High Court judgment by rejecting it. I can say the High Court judgment is wrong. That is me rejecting it and basically expressing an opinion on that. But it doesn't destroy it. The report still stands, or the order of the High Court still stands. So just to disaggregate it in terms of your question of whether it is effective, the findings of the Commission of Inquiry, therefore, the short commission, therefore, stands for purposes of the constitutional effect. Now, this is important because this is not the first time. It's actually happened over the years. I remember, I think there was a famous report, the one involving the late Mr. P.V. Obin, you know, involving some assets, Shraj and all that. I remember there were lots, you know, a portion of that report was rejected. But the effect of that moment is the same as today. And for many people, once the government rejected it, that was the end of the story. No, that finding against Mr. P.V. Obin at that time stands till today as the judgment of the High Court in terms of equivalence. So it's important to understand this constitutional aspect of things. Now, I need to also state this, that the commissioners have not authorized me to say this, but I can say it with authority, that the commissioners were at great pains to make specific findings against certain individuals because these persons were acting on behalf of the state. These persons purportedly acted in good faith when they did what they did. Some of them may have put their lives in jeopardy in the line of duty for the things that they did on behalf of the state. The commissioners were therefore not primarily motivated by liability per se. If you read the totality of the report, the commissioners were mainly motivated by structural and systemic reforms moving forward. So a chunk of the report itself, in fact, more than 70 to 80% of the report was devoted to reform moving forward. It was just a small bit. But again, in Ghana and from the media perspective, you know, the media can always be accused of this because you are more interested in what makes the news. So the focus was more on who has been found guilty for what and all that. Yes. That was looking into the past. That is already gone. The commissioners were motivated mainly by structural and systemic changes, and of course they recommended certain liabilities against certain people for which action was intended to be taken. So the most important thing for us to remember is this. As we enter 2020, and again, as I tie that into your question, as we enter 2020, December elections, we should be worried about the weaponization of our elections. We have had our elections weaponized for close to 2 decades. When we have had a normalization to a point of people accepting that when it's time for election, a group of people will call bandits. I will call bandits. Many of them are bandits because they operate typically like that. Show up at an electoral grounds, basically just lay hands on the ballot box and disappear. Some ballot boxes have disappeared from Ghana, never to be seen till today. And we have accepted this as normal. And the parties are competing in this respect on the extent to which they can be violent. In other words, who can be more violent than the other? We will call that a race to the bottom. As Mr. Griffiths has said, the parties don't own them. But if you don't own them, don't accept their acting in your name. Because as I sit here, if someone goes out there and starts calling himself my name and describing himself in a manner that fits me, and goes around misbehaving in a way that I know is improper in accordance with my expectation of my personality, and I still watch on, I will be imbued with having given that person the impression of legitimacy. What we have had as we speak at the moment is a gradual weaponization of our election, the normalization of violence, electoral violence, and as we enter 2020, my worry is we have the same criticisms coming up. Now, they start normally with the criticism. So, Mr. Griffith's worry, I will expect that Mr. Boyd will respond to that. In other words, the worry of, you mentioned some training somewhere, I think you mentioned Otchere, right? And we had media reports about that. True or false, I don't know. Nobody knows it. Now, that will provide the quote and unquote, the legitimacy and the excuse for a response. So the danger I worry about, especially as we go into 2020, is that the very things that the Ayawaso Commission was supposed to stamp out, particularly in respect of some of the structural changes, some of the systemic changes, some of the cultural attitudes to election that should change. All those things, and particularly because of the way the media has responded to the government white paper, I think we are losing track of the Commission's report and a chunk of the things that are contained in there. The sad part is if we are not careful, it will gather dust. The Commission was also motivated by diction, language, labels. In my experience, and I've mentioned this before, the name given to an entity, a person, or practice is important. It makes a huge difference in the lives of that entity. And I've always cited the example of female genital mutilation. Because I remember in the 90s, when this practice became topical, the initial name was female circumcision. Nobody cared about female circumcision because male circumcision is a good thing. You know, well, I'm sure Mr. Boydu is reacting, but the biology says it's a good thing. Well, you know, we can debate that. But generally, female circumcision as labeled was not a problem until the name changed from circumcision to mutilation. Gradually, everybody and people who were associated with mutilation, with circumcision, and people actually argued for circumcision when it was called circumcision. But the moment they started calling it mutilation, nobody argued for it. The naming of an entity or a thing or practice is important. The Commission took the view that calling it vigilantism is a problem or it's problematic. And I still hold the view, and the Commission, I think, still holds the view. Well, there's no more Commission, but the Commission held the view that calling it vigilantism is problematic. Because when you open into the dictionary to check the meaning of vigilantism, one aspect of the meaning is that vigilantism is a positive intervention into a practice which is considered deviant or a vice by a person who otherwise has not been employed for that purpose. Therefore, you hear of the fact that there are murders ongoing, and you think you have enough, police strength and know-how to fight that, and you actually start fighting the supposed murderers, and you're able to bring people to book. Even though you are not the police, your action, which will be deemed as vigilantic, will be deemed as good, because you have intervened positively in the life of something. Once we call these political actors vigilantists, in the main, we have accepted to a point that what they're doing is good. But tell me, electoral security is fundamentally that of the police, the Ghana Armed Forces who are co-opted, allied security agencies, and then all of us who should ensure that we do not intervene in the process negatively. Allowing a group of people who have been trained by the political parties and whom, as Mr. Griffith said, they don't own them, and indeed I think both parties have said this, they don't own them, but they know them. And I think, one leading MPP activist, NPP actor, said they know them. In other words, the parties know them, and they know the parties, and they know the people who own them. And they accept implicitly that on that day, they may intervene on their behalf, and it's okay. I think that we should go beyond public denunciation. The parties must take active steps to ensure that these entities do not act in their name. Because my fear is that in 2020, we may have a repeat of Ayawaso.
Yeah.
So the last point I would want to make here, and this again goes to the parties respectfully, particularly the two parties. Article 55 of the Constitution requires that political parties in Ghana must be organized along democratic lines. Any party that accepts electoral violence, either actively or tacitly, has violated the spirit of that provision. Because democratic lines implies that you accept the police powers of state. Any entity that is set up to provide rival security, which is not recognized by the police entities of state, is setting up a rival authority to the state. That is a violation of the democratic expectation of political parties. So my expectation as we go into 2020, and I'm glad the NPP, I think, started a process, especially through the government, and the NDC was invited to the table. I think that the parties must publicly demonstrate a denunciation of these parties, and not just that. If any entity acts in the name of either of these parties, Peace parties should be seen to make an official police report and facilitate the process leading to the arrest of these entities. Because we are going to see a repeat of Ayawaso in 2020 if we don't go beyond the rhetoric.
Thank you very much. I want to get my audience involved. I'll come back to John Boydu shortly. I'm just taking 4 contributions or questions, just 4. And I'll come back to John Boydu, and I'll talk briefly with him on his reactions and also the register that's going to be compassed. So 4, just 4. Yes, sir. Your name. And very brief, 30 seconds, no more, no less. I'll catch you if you go beyond 30 seconds. I'm sorry. Let's go.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Idi Moayudin. I think with respect to the political vigilante groups associated with political parties, I think there's no debate about that. The political parties themselves have come up boldly.
You have a question?
Yes.
Or is it a contribution?
Well, it's kind of contribution.
Okay, good. So make it.
My concern really is the bit about the enforcement, the enforcement of the laws. In other jurisdictions, we see laws as enforcement. In Ghana, we see it as that of enactment. I really, if we are to go strictly by both the letter and the spirit of our laws, we probably would not even need a Vigilante Act.
So you are for enforcement?
The legal, because we have all the laws.
Thank you very much.
But the bit about the enforcement is why the difficulty.
Thank you very much. Yes?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Daniel Blizananjuna from Daimok. My question is to the erudite Kofi Abuchi with regards to Commission of Inquiry. To what extent can the police or whatever investigative body secure evidence outside the testimony of a witness before a Commission of Inquiry for prosecution? Because we all know, and being guided by JSC Mafusau's ruling, the famous Ghana 50 ruling, that you cannot use a witness evidence or whatever he gave before the commission.
I think that question is very clear. Let me take you.
Thank you very much. My name is Obin Daniel. As we are discussing about this political vigilance, in fact, integrity is something very key. Of course, our senior representative from the other political party or NDC did not help us in this political discussion, because you cannot tell us, the whole Ghana or the whole world, that NDC rather doesn't have political vigilance, but then they do recognize that there is another party that has a political, that is quite, I mean, the integrity here or the credibility here, I mean, it's quite questionable. Because it is very clear. Chief Azoka has spoken. We saw even their former Interior Minister, Honorable Makoyongo, even stating something. I mean, this is quite clear. Honorable Joseph Yamin is on
you don't
everywhere.
Believe that statement.
I mean,
thank you very much. Yes, sir.
I'm here for Toby.
Yes, sir.
I want to ask this question about what's happening at the Ayawaso West Wagon. It has been a serious problem in the country, and it is something that, if you are not careful, it will disturb the peace of this country. Now, I want to ask, my question is thrown to Honorable John Boydu. The MEP is in power. What measures are they putting in place to ensure that these laws are enforced, the law that has been enacted?
Especially for ahead of 2020.
Yeah, ahead of 2020.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final one, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, time is up.
Oh, time is up.
No, you can't go, but he can't.
You see, my point is, everybody is saying the law must work. The law must work. Who should work? The judiciary, the security agency.
Speak into the microphone for me, please. Yes.
I'm saying that the judiciary must sit up. It's not, they are not there for only the vulnerables, those who still maybe plantain or whatever. Yes. But politicians too are part of it. Unfortunately for us Ghanaians, after elections, whatever went on just is swept under the carpet, and then we only render apology. Oh, we are sorry. So now everybody knows that if I work hard, fight hard, and win power, that's all. I can do everything. So Ghanaians must sit up, the judiciary, the security agencies, and all Ghanaians must sit up and resist those kind of behavior.
Okay,
so
thank you very much. John Woodley, that's a question to you, and also you can respond to that.
I think that in looking at the problem, we were minded with the enforcement of the law, which is good, it is positive, and government needs to strengthen law enforcement agencies, government, and parties must also desist from interfering in these things that happens. For us in the New Patriotic Party, we don't benefit in any way the groupings that tend to protest us as a result of lack of protection when we are attacked. I've had experience, practical experience, where group of people in a Sutifi, I was lucky we're close to a police station. If it had been any other place, the story would have been different, you understand? And this is something that has been going on. Sometimes if you are sitting like this, though you are not part of that process, you talk very smoothly. It is good, stop it. But if you get involved and you are attacked, that very day, had it not been, I don't normally work with security people. I don't normally work with a lot of people. That day, I don't know why I decided when I got to Kumasi to ask some of our party activists to follow me to a Sutifi. It was also because a day or two before, a policeman had been beaten by some of these thugs who were preventing students from registering. That was my luck. So like you are saying, the name itself doesn't connote negativity. It's the excess of the use of it or taking the law into your hands that makes it negative. I cannot see how political parties, as part of our process, will not have some of our activists serving us. Like you're saying, what sense does it make for any individual born of a woman to walk to a polling station and pick ballot box and vote with it? What sense does it make? But it happens. So are you saying that political parties will sit down? I remember in 2000 and...
But that's why the police is there.
I remember, you see, sometimes if you don't even know the capacity of the police, you end up concluding wrongly. I remember I went to Tamale as part of monitoring registration exercise and saw that they are case registering. There was a single policeman sitting there. I asked, policeman, don't you see that these are people who are not at the age of 18? He said, if you have eyes, go and sack them. You can imagine what will have happened. That MPP person sacks somebody who is an NDC person registering, or you will have seen what will have happened. So it is not very easy like that. I think that it is important the last contributor mentioned the role of the judiciary. It's very, very critical. If these things happen, get the police even exact arrest, get to the judiciary, and it delays. I can cite a typical example about in 2015. Our offices, our headquarters was vandalized. A lot of our information was taken away. Thankfully, we arrested the people. As we speak now, it's still in court. I'm not saying that we must sidestep the rules and regulations and all that, but if we see expeditiously some of these cases that come before them is being dispensed with, and people are given the exact punishment to serve as deterrent, it will be helpful. I don't know, Griffith, we don't determine how the national security or the police or the army recruits their people. If it is true that you have an information, which is important for all of us, because the police or the army are institutions that does not belong to the New Patriotic Party. So if you know a vigilante group or an individual who is not qualified based on your judgments, because on what basis are you saying that they are recruiting people and training people, and so that alone is wrong? If you know, I think that will help ourselves in making appropriate report to appropriate institution for us to deal with. I can assure you, for us in the New Patriotic Party, we don't gain at all. But we must be honest and truthful. For us to say that, as for our political, we don't own them. These are young party people who, for reason of lack of protection by our political activists, opt on their own Because I remember, for instance, there's no political architecture or campaign strategy by any political party by not providing support group at the polling station level.
But your agent should be enough.
Your agent cannot be enough. If the agent needs something, if the agent is attacked at the polling station, and the police is incapable, it's not a question of if the police are capable of dealing with these issues, if the police are capable of effecting arrests, if in the shortest possible time these arrests are dealt with, I think that it will serve as deterrent for people who want to do that.
I'll bring you in. Kofi makes the point that the party should be instrumental in facilitating the arrest and prosecution of these individuals who are your members who may have taken the law into their own hands, acting under the umbrella of Vigilantism.
I can assure you, it hasn't happened in this country before. Ayawaso West Wogon is not the only example of electoral violence in our country.
At least, are you committed to do that?
Fantastic, because if we were not, we wouldn't have even set up such a commission to go into the far-reaching report and advice and the way forward that the commission gave us. So for us as a party, we support the president and believe that the needed logistics by institutions that are expected to ensure peace and order in our country should be provided for them to be able to do their work. And we would denounce, as we've said, I have issues that I have had cause. I haven't seen any political party doing that before. I have had cause to issue statements denouncing some of these activities that are associated with our party people. And I think that we'll continue to do so. And we will continue also to expect the public to also support us in identifying and also encouraging the police to do what they must do. And if it gets to the law enforcement agencies or the judiciary, expeditious delivery of justice will also be helpful.
Kofi, final comments on what you just said?
No, I understand what you're saying, and I understand the practical realities of things too. His worry is the typical, criminological worry of someone saying, I will commit an offense or I may commit an offense because I'm expecting the other person to commit an offense. So let me do it first. And this is the reality. And it's not just, it's between the parties. You see, there's an expectation on the part of both parties that one may do it, so I have to do it. I think John put it in right perspective when he said the architecture of the parties reflect that, both parties. So it's true that both parties actually expect that somehow, if you don't send your quote-unquote vigilantes there, your party vigilantes there, the other party is likely to send it. And if they send it and we don't send it, then they can hold sway in that particular electoral ground. So if the parties can have an understanding with good faith, the problem is the good faith, an understanding with good faith that come December 2020, one, we shall work to support the police. Two, even if we have any organized groupings in our midst, they are not going to be weaponized. Three, if we have such groups who are not weaponized, these groups will be made to work through the police. And ultimately, we are going to ensure that we bolster the security there as opposed to basically taking laws into our own hands. The point I'm just trying to make is the expectation that one side is likely to misbehave, and by reason of which we have our own reactive strategy in place. And as soon as we hear even of the slightest suspicion of something happening on the other side, we quickly also go in and do our own thing. That's the chaos which I worry about. And again, my worry stems from the fact that both parties expect that the other is likely to do something. So they'll do first.
Mr. Griffiths, final thoughts on this, especially looking ahead, solution focus. You've had some of the conversations already. What do we do to get ready for 2020?
Well, before then, let me quickly react to my friend here, a statement that he made that I indicated that none of these groups have been in any way affiliated.
It's owned by the party.
Yes. And whilst he was doing that, he mentioned individual names of people around which these groups revolve. And that is exactly what, I'm sorry if I had misinformed him, but that is exactly what I was saying.
So you said that there are individuals in your party who...
Yes, and
but
we
not
have
the party as an institution.
Yes, and we have since, especially, the occurrence of the Ayawaso West Wagon, issue statements after statements, discouraging the these groups from revolving around these individuals, where some of them have made statement publicly. We've hauled them to the Functional Executive Committee, and I can cite the example of Honorable Joseph Yamin.
He was called and was sanctioned?
Yes, actually. He apologized and then... but so let me say
finally,
that...
Yes.
Let me say that Mr. John Boadu also indicated that perhaps if I am aware of any group that are being trained anywhere, I should make that
provided to the police for investigation. So that
first of all, it is very clear, and it was part of the report, that the group that came under the cover of police SWAT team, it's an illegal and unconstitutional group and has to be disbanded.
By who?
It was a recommendation.
It was a recommendation. That's very important to take note of. Now, we are all also aware of individuals who were captured before the 2016 elections. I mean, today, in today's world of, let me say, the new media, social media and what have you, you cannot hide a lot of things. Their faces were captured in T-shirts of Invincible Force and Kandahar or whatever the names are. And these same faces have now appeared in uniforms, interestingly, embarking on operations where they have ski mask, which is usually used when you want to hide your face or you are working under extreme, weather, and therefore was necessary to, protect yourself. So as much as we can pretend that, these people were not vigilantes who have been recruited into the national security apparatus, the evidence speaks for itself.
Okay, you have the final word on this. Obviously, from the conversation, it appears we are not ready yet for a violent-free election period. For some reason, all the things we put in place, the dialogue, the law, the sense that it hasn't been adequate to deal with it. It makes me worry. I mean, what would be your own proposal then?
Well, I think the parties ought to understand that we are at a point in our democracy where large segments of our population are beginning to lose faith in the parties. Evidence of it, the recent failed referendum. This, in my view, is one of the most painful episodes for me this year, because I was a very loud, known yes person, but I understood the sentiment from the other side, that we are tired of these parties, they only bring chaos and confusion and violence and all of that. It was very painful for me to see us lose a great opportunity, a historic opportunity to advance our democracy and decentralization in this country, just because a very large segment of the population just decided to rise up against this whole importation of parties to local level. I thought it was an unfortunate thing. We've lost a great opportunity. I hope we return to it at some point. But the message is very clear that people are getting really tired of the parties and their misbehavior, especially in the areas of vigilantism. So our democracy needs to take note of that and realize that this is a turning point. It does also tell me that citizens are not as helpless as they think they are, or as we think we are, that in fact, we can use the power of the vote also to punish parties that we think are encouraging violence. Because that is not what democracy is about. I mean, if you form a party because you think you have great ideas that given power, you can transform the country. I don't think either party can tell us that they love Ghana so much that even if it means using violence, they will use it to get power so that they will make Ghana better. No. Once you begin to use violence, and once you begin to subscribe to the use of violence, it bespeaks ill motive. It shows that you want power for reasons other than transforming the lives of Ghanaians. So I think that people too must not feel so helpless, that in fact, if you feel that a particular party or candidate is behaving in ways that are dangerous to our democracy, that you should be able to use the same power of the votes that you use to elect them to diselect them. Yeah. And I think the police too need to really just not sit there and say they are totally helpless. It is your job to provide security at the polling booth and the polling stations. And this idea that, well, the vigilantes have these big patrons and these. All of that could be true, but you still have to do your job as the police. Yeah. If you arrested somebody and they didn't prosecute, then we would see that you did your job and then the political parties were the ones who failed. But don't just sit there, look at all of this stuff happen, do nothing, and then, because I think everybody must play their role, is what I'm saying. Citizens must play their role, the police must play their role, the parties must play their role. And for me, I think that this whole failed referendum thing was a wake-up moment for me, that we are getting to a point where we might be putting our democracy in jeopardy if people begin to lose faith in such numbers just because they think parties are misbehaving. Yeah. And some of the things they said about parties almost make it look as if parties have done nothing good for the country since the Fourth Republic. There's a lot of good that has happened in our democracy thanks to political parties. But this bit of it, this vigilantism bit of it, is causing people to just lose faith and would one day throw the baby away with the bathwater if we're not careful.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for my audience, for my panelists. Thank you very much. H. Kwesi Prempeh, Mr. Kofi Abuchi, Mr. Griffiths, and John Boyd, the General Secretary of the NPP. And there are few of you who won books. I want to quickly go through the name. Ebenezer Boama, Charles Adote Alote, Swaka Mohammed, Nuruddin Mohammed, Seth Otchere, and Jacob Ishan. You came here very first to arrive, the first 6, and as Manasseh Azuria when he had promised, you get some of his books. In fact, the 4th John, The Voice of Conscience, and Letter to my Future Wife. And so just see Manasseh Azuria and pick your prize. Thank you very much. When we return after this particular break, we're going to have a short few minutes to look at the media going forward. As you've heard already, the next year election is going to really be dependent on what the media does with our political friends in the game of partisan politics and civil society as well. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about that. And so thank you for staying, and a big round of applause for yourself again.
Yeah, thank you.